There is much empirical evidence that self-affirmation is effective. Moreover, self-affirmations have been shown to do more than simply help people maintain a general sense of self-worth. Self-affirmations also help minimize a wide range of defensive and potentially harmful behaviors people exhibit when faced with threat, such as the tendency to attribute responsibility to themselves when they succeed, but to deny responsibility when they fail. For more discussion, see Chapter 5. Another defensive maneuver people show in response to a threat to self-esteem is putting down members of stereotyped groups. This behavior is less likely to occur if people affirm a valued aspect of themselves prior to evaluating stereotyped group members. In the domain of health awareness, studies have shown that after affirming the self, people are more receptive to troubling but potentially useful health information, resulting in a greater likelihood of actually engaging in healthy behaviors. Self-enhancement and well-being. In light of the fact that people tend to employ various strategies to view themselves in a positive light, we may wonder whether having a truly honest and accurate understanding of oneself instead might be better for a person's mental health and happiness. In a provocative line of work, Shelley Taylor and Jonathan Brown challenged this position. They argue that self-knowledge often includes positive illusions about the self, that we are funnier, smarter, or warmer than we really are, and that such illusions, far from being detrimental, actually enhance well-being. Dozens of studies, carried out with Europeans and North Americans, have shown that people who are well-adjusted are more prone to various illusions about the self compared with those who suffer from low self-esteem and unhappiness. In a laboratory context, Taylor and her colleagues examined whether positive illusions about the self have good or bad biological consequences in stressful situations. Participants who were more likely to hold positive illusions about themselves, high self-enhancers, and participants who were less likely to hold positive illusions about themselves, low self-enhancers, faced several stress-inducing tasks, such as counting backward by sevens from 9,095, during which their biological responses to stress were recorded. The results showed a healthier set of coping responses among high self-enhancers compared with low self-enhancers. For instance, high self-enhancers exhibited lower baseline levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and less arousal of their autonomic nervous system during the stressful tasks. Other researchers have questioned the notion that positive illusions consistently promote good adjustment and health, arguing instead that accurate rather than false self-beliefs foster well-being and other positive outcomes. They cite research showing that people who rate themselves more favorably than others do, that is, people who self-enhance, are seen by others as narcissistic. Other studies demonstrate that people who hold relatively accurate views of themselves, in that their ratings of themselves are similar to others' ratings of them, are judged by others more positively than are people who self-enhance. Perhaps the greatest challenge to Taylor's and Brown's thesis about the benefits of positive illusions comes from cross-cultural research. This work demonstrates that East Asians are less likely than Westerners to approve of positive illusions about the self. In one study, Japanese college students were less likely than American students to assume they were better than average in important abilities, such as academic talent. Such cross-cultural evidence suggests that positive illusions do not automatically enhance well-being. They often do so for Westerners because a positive view of the self is a cherished cultural value in the West. In contrast, personal well-being for East Asians appears to be more closely tied to interdependent values, such as fulfilling social roles and expectations. This finding is consistent with an interdependent self-construal. So are self-enhancing tendencies adaptive or not? Do they benefit the individual? At present, the answer appears to be it depends. For example, Robbins and Beer, 2001, showed that students who entered college with self-enhancing beliefs about their academic ability reported higher average levels of self-esteem and well-being over a 4-year period relative to their non-enhancing peers. However, self-enhancement tendencies were associated with a downward trajectory over the 4-year period for both self-esteem and well-being. In essence, although self-enhancement was linked to greater self-esteem and well-being in the short term, The advantages linked to self-enhancement eroded over time. The safest conclusion to draw at this point is that self-enhancement provides a number of benefits, but it can be taken too far and exact significant costs. Self-verification. Although a wealth of evidence indicates that self-enhancement is a powerful motive that drives our pursuit of self-evaluation, we don't always want to see ourselves through rose-colored glasses. The truth, at least our version of it, also matters. According to self-verification theory, sometimes we strive for stable, subjectively accurate beliefs about ourselves rather than invariably favorable ones. Stable and accurate self-views make us more predictable to ourselves and others, which helps interactions with others go more smoothly. More concretely, we strive to get others to confirm or verify our pre-existing beliefs about ourselves. For example, if you see yourself as extroverted, self-verification theory would predict that you will seek to get others to see you as extroverted as well. This holds true even for negative self-views. If you truly believe you are, say, socially awkward, getting others to see this subjective truth bolsters your feelings of coherence and predictability. Self-verification theory, the theory that people sometimes strive for stable, subjectively accurate beliefs about themselves because such self-views give them a sense of coherence and predictability. People engage in a number of self-verification strategies. They selectively attend to and recall information that is consistent with, and therefore verifies, their views of themselves. People with negative self-views, for example, spend more time studying negative rather than positive feedback about themselves. They remember negative feedback better, and they prefer to interact with others who are likely to provide negative rather than positive feedback. People also choose to enter into relationships that maintain consistent views of the self. These sorts of preferences guarantee that their personal lives will probably confirm their self-views. We accept the love we think we deserve. Stephen Chbosky, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. In a study of intimate bonds, romantic partners who viewed each other in a congruent fashion, that is, whose perceptions of each other were in agreement with their self-views, reported more commitment to the relationship, even when one partner viewed the other as in a negative light. Box 3.4. Not so fast. Critical thinking about assuming a single explanation. Sometimes I wish you were smarter so you'd realize how stupid you are. Elephant, spelled with an F. Consider what the following decisions have in common: applying only to highly selective law schools, ignoring the physical therapy your doctor prescribed, pursuing a career in art instead of accounting, asking one of the most popular girls on campus out on a date. Each decision involves an assessment of your traits and abilities and a decidedly favorable assessment. We've learned how strong the desire for self-enhancement tends to be, especially among members of Western cultures, and how adept people are at satisfying that desire. But while it is tempting to assume that the desire for self-enhancement alone accounts for people's inflated self-assessments, other, non-motivational factors may in fact be at play. One example of a cognitive barrier to accurate self-assessment is the simple fact that sometimes people don't have access to all the information required to appraise their traits and abilities accurately. Of course, we don't have access to non-conscious processes, but we may also lack basic knowledge related to the trait or ability in question. Kruger, Dunning, and their colleagues offer a particularly clear example of this deficiency, what they call the double curse of incompetence. The curse is that incompetent people, that is, those who tend to perform well below their peers in a given domain, are deficient not only in the skills needed to perform better, but also in the very knowledge necessary for accurately recognizing their incompetence. We all know of students who walk out of an exam room certain they've aced the test, only to find out a few days later that they bombed it. The skills and knowledge that would have led to a better test score are pretty much the same skills and knowledge required for having a more accurate prediction of how they did on the test in the first place. So before concluding that someone's overly flattering self-assessment is a clear sign of a hefty appetite for self-enhancement, it's important to consider other less motivational sources of flawed self-appraisal. We mentioned just one of these sources, lacking the skills and knowledge needed to make more accurate self-assessments in the first place, but other possibilities exist. For example, in an effort to be polite, other people tend to provide us with overly positive estimates of our abilities and traits. To the extent that's true, we can scarcely be blamed for overestimating our abilities and the attractiveness of our personality. The broader lesson here is that a certain explanation for our own and other people's behaviors can jump out as obvious and in fact may sometimes be correct. However, we should also consider the possibility that the behavior in question may have additional, less obvious causes. Can both self-enhancement and self-verification motives be at play? Sure. Self-enhancement seems to be most relevant to our emotional responses to feedback about ourselves, whereas self-verification determines our more cognitive assessment of how valid that feedback is. To test this hypothesis, the SWAN team gave participants with negative or positive self-beliefs negative or positive feedback in terms of participants' evaluations of the accuracy and competence of the feedback, that is, the quality of the information. Self-verification prevailed. Those with negative self-beliefs found the negative feedback most accurate, whereas participants with positive beliefs rated the positive feedback as most accurate. All participants, however, felt good about the positive feedback and disliked the negative feedback. Our quest to verify our sense of ourselves, then, guides our assessment of the validity of self-relevant information, while our desire to think favorably about ourselves guides our emotional reactions to the same information. Identity cues and self-verification. We create self-confirming social environments through the clothes we wear, hairstyles, jewelry, tattoos, and other identity cues. Left, a high school student wears his varsity jacket off the field, signaling his identity as an athlete. Right, girls signal their youth and trendiness by donning Harajuku-inspired fashion while hanging out in the Harajuku district of Tokyo. Looking back, self-evaluative activities such as seeking out evaluative feedback about ourselves can be driven by different motives, such as self-enhancement and self-verification. Self-enhancement strategies include self-serving construals and self-affirmations. When self-verification is our priority, we seek out appraisals and relationship partners that confirm our pre-existing self-views, and we display cues that increase the likelihood that others will see us as we see ourselves. Self-regulation, motivating and controlling behavior. Self-regulation refers to the processes by which people initiate, alter, and control their behavior in pursuit of their goals, whether the goal is doing well in school, being a good friend, or getting in better shape. Given that successful goal pursuit often requires resisting temptations, self-regulation also involves the ability to prioritize long-term goals, getting into graduate school, by foregoing short-term immediate rewards, a weeknight out on the town. Let's take a look at what social psychologists have discovered about self-regulation. Self-regulation, processes by which people initiate, alter, and control their behavior in the pursuit of goals, including the ability to resist short-term rewards that thwart the attainment of long-term goals. Self-discrepancy theory. One influential perspective on self-regulation is captured in a theory proposed by Torrey Higgins, 1987. According to self-discrepancy theory, people hold beliefs about not only what they are actually like, but also what they would ideally like to be and what they think they ought to be. Your actual self is the self you believe you are. Your ideal self represents your hopes and wishes, and your ought self represents your duties and obligations. According to self-discrepancy theory, ideal and ought beliefs serve as self-guides, motivating people to regulate their behavior in order to close the gap between their actual self and their ideal and ought standards. When people feel that they're failing to live up to these standards, in other words, when they perceive a discrepancy between their actual self and either their ideal or ought self, there are predictable emotional consequences. Specifically, discrepancies between the actual and the ideal self produce dejection-related emotions, and discrepancies between the actual and the ought self give rise to agitation-related emotions. Here are two examples. When the judges disparaged Samir's singing ability at an American Idol audition, The discrepancy between his actual self, a poor singer, and his ideal self, a rock star, arouses dejection-related emotions such as disappointment and shame. When Mina loses patience with her ailing grandmother, actual self, she may feel agitation-related emotions such as guilt and anxiety. If her odd self includes being a patient and loving granddaughter. Ideal and odd standards are associated with two fundamentally different approaches to goal pursuit. When people regulate their behavior with respect to ideal self standards, they have a promotion focus or a focus on attaining positive outcomes. By contrast, when people regulate their behavior with respect to odd self standards, they have a prevention focus, a focus on avoiding negative outcomes. So imagine if you have the chance to hang out with someone you've had a crush on for a while. A promotion focus would nudge you to focus on what you can do to get the person to reciprocate your feelings, whereas a prevention focus would have you thinking about what you can do to avoid looking like a fool. Self-discrepancy theory, a theory that behavior is motivated by standards reflecting ideal and odd selves. Falling short of these standards produces specific emotions, dejection-related emotions in the case of actual ideal discrepancies, and agitation-related emotions in the case of actual odd discrepancies. Actual self, the self that people believe they are. Ideal self, the self that embodies people's wishes and aspirations. Odd self, the self that is concerned with the duties, obligations, and external demands people feel they are compelled to honor. Promotion focus, self-regulation of behavior with respect to ideal self-standards, a focus on attaining positive outcomes through approach-related behaviors. Prevention focus, self-regulation of behavior with respect to odd self-standards, a focus on avoiding negative outcomes through avoidance-related behaviors. Lots of evidence supports Hagen's account of how ideal and odd selves can have different emotional, motivational, and behavioral consequences. When people are subtly prompted to think about how they might approximate their ideal self, for example, by reading personality trait terms that capture their ideal self, they generally exhibit elevated cheerful emotions and heightened sensitivity to positive outcomes. But if they think they will never become their ideal self, they experience dejection-related emotions such as depression and shame, and show reduced physiological arousal. In contrast, associations to a person's odd self and any deviation from it activates agitated emotions such as guilt or panic, elevated physiological arousal, avoidant behavior, and sensitivity to negative outcomes. As you might expect, Westerners are more likely to have a promotion focus. They are more interested in attaining personal goals and more likely to feel that their own efforts are sufficient to achieve them. East Asians are more likely to exhibit a prevention focus. They are more concerned with the possible negative consequences of their actions for their relations with others. Shifts in construals and perspectives. When people pursue a goal with a promotion versus prevention focus, the goal itself is construed in two fundamentally different ways: obtaining a positive outcome or avoiding a negative one. Shifts in one's construal or perspective are central to a number of other theories on self-regulation. Many of these theories focus on how people control the impulse to engage in behaviors that undermine their goals. How do you resist the impulse to go out with your friends the night before a big exam? How about stopping yourself from having another scoop of ice cream when you're trying to lose weight? In the early 1970s, Walter Mischel and colleagues studied such questions in a well-known program of research involving, of all things, marshmallows. In the classic marshmallow paradigm, preschool children were left in a room with a tempting marshmallow and given one of two options. They could have the one marshmallow small reward immediately simply by ringing a bell to summon the experimenter, or they could have two marshmallows large reward if they waited for the experimenter to return 15 minutes later. So go for the small reward now or control yourself so as to get a bigger reward later. Sound familiar? Go out with your friends to have a fun night now or resist so you can do better on your exam tomorrow. It turns out that one way to exert self-control in such situations is to shift how you construe the tempting reward, whether it be a marshmallow ice cream or night out on the town. This cognitive strategy is what enabled some of the children in Michel's studies to resist the small immediate reward in the service of the larger one later. Rather than construe the object before them as a marshmallow in all its sweet and mouth-watering delight, some of the children viewed the marshmallow in cooler, less arousing terms, visualizing it as a decidedly non-mouth-watering cotton ball or cloud. If you're trying to resist a temptation in the here and now, going out with your friends, it helps to focus less on its arousing, inviting features, great music, laughter, and more on its unappealing facets, spending money, losing much needed sleep, self-control, and construals. If the young girl views the marshmallow in cooler terms, such as terms of something that resembles a cloud or cotton ball, rather than construing the marshmallow in hotter terms, such as in terms of its yummy mouth-watering qualities, she'll have a better shot at resisting gobbling up the marshmallow while she waits for the researcher to return so that she can get 2 marshmallows instead. Construals of a situation can vary in other ways as well. Trope and colleagues have argued that events, goals, behaviors, and so forth can also vary in how high level or low level they are. High level construals focus on abstract, global, and essential features, whereas low level construals emphasize salient, incidental, and concrete details. In other words, high level construals involve seeing the forest, whereas low level construals put the spotlight on the trees. It's higher level construals that tend to facilitate self control. The idea is that higher level construals, compared with lower level ones, increase people's appreciation of the consequences that their choices and behaviors have for their long term goals. In other words, high level construals place the emphasis on people's larger goals and values. For example, in a high level construal, when you're focusing on the forest, not the trees, you think about what that extra scoop of ice cream means for your dieting and health goals, whereas in a low level construal, when your focus is on the trees, you're focused on the pleasing taste and smooth texture of that ice cream. Automatic self-control strategies. Exercising self-control may sound like a conscious, deliberate endeavor, but there's quite a lot of evidence that self-regulation efforts can operate automatically without our even realizing it. Researchers have distinguished between goal intentions, which simply specify a goal one wants to achieve, I intend to be kinder to my roommate, from implementation intentions, which specify how one will behave to achieve a goal under particular circumstances. Implementation intentions follow an if-then format. For example, if my roommate makes a snarky remark, then I'll just ignore it. So the if refers to some kind of cue, and the then refers to a behavior that will follow the cue to achieve the larger goal, in this case being kinder to a roommate. There's no question that to achieve a goal we must form an intention, but research shows that forming multiple smaller implementation intentions related to the goal increases our likelihood of goal attainment. Implementation intention, and if then plan to engage in a goal-directed behavior, then, whenever a particular cue, if, is encountered. In the typical study of implementation intentions, participants are randomly assigned to either form an implementation intention or not. Take, for example, a group of students who all share the goal of completing a paper. Those who are randomly assigned to the implementation intention condition are asked to form an implementation intention by indicating a specific point in time, Saturday afternoon, a specific place in my dorm room, when they will engage in the goal-directed behavior, work on my paper. Students in the other group are not asked to form an implementation intention, but simply have the general goal of completing the paper. When the level of goal completion, completing the paper, is then assessed, students who formed an implementation intention show higher rates of goal completion. Such if-then implementation intentions help you reach your goals by putting you on the lookout for whatever cue is specified, if it's Saturday afternoon, and making you likely to automatically enact the goal-directed behavior. Then I will work on my paper. The effectiveness, uh, the effectiveness of implementation intentions has been documented across a wide range of goals and domains. Doing well in school, being healthy, succeeding at work. Stern and West, 2014, recently tested whether the formation of implementation intentions might even make successful social interactions more pleasant, such as ones involving people of different races. What they found was that forming implementation intentions for such interactions, intentions that specify an anxiety-reducing behavior when feeling uncomfortable, increase the likelihood of a successful interaction. The lesson here seems to be that the next time you anticipate an anxiety-provoking interaction, your next interview, you might form an if-then plan for this interaction that specifies what you will do. Perhaps remind yourself of your amazing credentials whenever your heart starts to race. Let's take one more example. Suppose you're trying to eat a healthier diet, long-term goal, but you're faced with a plate of freshly baked cookies, temptation. Surely the alluring properties of the cookies will put thoughts about eating healthily on the back burner, right? Fisbach, Friedemann, and Kuglansky, 2003, showed that quite the opposite can happen. The cookies may actually make you think more about your goal to eat healthily. The idea is that temptations, unhealthy foods, may become linked in memory to your goal, eating well, so that when temptations are brought to mind, so too are thoughts of healthy eating, and the connection between the two can occur automatically. What's more, the Fishback team found that bringing goals to mind first has the effect of diminishing thoughts about temptations. Thus, being faced with temptations reminds us of our goals, and thinking about our goals puts temptations out of mind. But before deciding, you can abandon all deliberate efforts to resist temptations. Note that the effects found in this research apply mainly to people for whom the goal is very important and who have had substantial past success resisting goal-interfering temptations. Looking back, self-regulation refers to how people go about initiating, changing, and controlling their behavior in pursuit of goals. Goal-directed actions can be motivated by standards in the form of ideal and ought selves. Such, such actions can be either promotion-focused or prevention-focused. People tend to experience dejection-related emotions when they fall short of their ideal standards, and they experience agitation-related emotions when they fail to meet their ought standards. Self-regulation can be facilitated by cooler and high-level construals of tempting short-term rewards. People may have unintentional self-control strategies such as implementation, intentions, and automatic behavior tendencies to approach goals and avoid temptations. Self-presentation. Alexei Santana entered Princeton University as a member of the class of 1993. His academic performance was impressive, he excelled in track, and he was admitted to one of Princeton's most exclusive eating clubs. He dazzled his roommates with tales of being raised on a sheep farm in the wild canyons of southern Utah, and with his unusual habits, such as preferring to sleep on the floor and routinely arising at dawn. The only trouble was that Alexei Santana was actually James Hogue, a 34-year-old drifter and former track star from Kansas City. Hogue had been convicted and served time for various crimes, including check forging and bicycle theft. He had gotten into prison thanks to a fraudulent application and had earned the admiration of his peers based on a completely fabricated identity. In the documentary film Con Man, Jesse Moss showed that Hogue had a pattern of assuming false identities. Hogue's story, or as it's Santana's, is an extreme version of a basic truth. Our social self is often a dramatic performance in which we try to project a public self consistent with our hopes and aspirations. This public self is one that we actively create in our social interactions, and that is shaped by the perceptions of other people and the perceptions we want others to have of us. The public self is concerned with self-presentation, presenting the person we would like others to believe we are. Another term for this concept is impression management, which refers to how we attempt to control the particular impressions other people form about us. Sociologist Irving Goffman inspired the study of self-presentation with his keen observations about how we stake out our identity in a public realm. Goffman relied on naturalistic observations of how people behave in public settings. He observed patients in mental institutions, noting how they seemed to ignore many rules of self-presentation, such as making unflattering comments about others and failing to observe common social courtesies. Goffman wrote an entire chapter on what he called response cries, like "oops," that we resort to after committing social gaffes and feel deeply embarrassed. These linguistic acts help reestablish social order when we have violated the rules of self-presentation, and show how committed we are to preserving the self we want others to expect. Self-presentation. James Hogue attended Princeton University on academic scholarship under the assumed name of Alexei Santana. He constructed a false identity for himself as a self-educated 18-year-old from Utah. Hogue was arrested for forgery, wrongful impersonation, and falsifying records at Princeton. Such observations led Goffman to form what has been called a dramaturgic perspective of the social self. Social interaction can be thought of as a drama of self-presentation, in which we attempt to create and maintain an impression of ourselves in the minds of others. Critical to this drama, in Goffman's terms, is face, the public image of ourselves that we want others to have. For instance, one person may want to be seen as a gifted, temperamental artist. Another may want to give the impression of being an object of romantic interest to many people. Social interactions are the stage on which we play out these kinds of claims, regardless of how true they may be. Much like a play, the social drama of self-presentation is highly collaborative. We depend on others to honor our desired social identities, and others likewise depend on us to honor their face claims. Self-presentation, presenting the person we would like others to believe we are. Face, the public image of ourselves that we want others to believe. Self-monitoring, the tendency to monitor one's behavior to fit the current situation. Self-monitoring, this couple is probably engaging in a considerable degree of self-monitoring, altering their behavior to fit the specific demands of first date situations like this one. Goffman's insights have shaped the study of the social self in several ways. For example, the concept of self-monitoring derives in part from Goffman's work. Self-monitoring refers to the tendency to monitor one's behavior to fit the demands of the current situation. High self-monitors carefully scrutinize situations and, like actors, shift their self-presentation and behavior according to the people and situation. In contrast, low self-monitors are more likely to behave according to their own traits and preferences, regardless of the social context. This suggests admirable candor and honesty. However, one study showed that patients in a psychiatric hospital scored low on a self-monitoring scale, suggesting that effective social functioning requires participation in some degree of strategic self-presentation. Private and public faces. People may present themselves differently in private versus public. Here Rihanna is shown in her more private life, out for a coffee run with no carefully constructed public face. But B, she does present a public face on the red carpet at the Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala in 2014. Self-handicapping. One of the complexities of strategic self-presentation is that people often don't live up to the public self they're trying to portray. For example, your claim about being the next great American writer will eventually be put to the test when you submit your prose for publication. Your claim about being a great triathlete will eventually face the truth of the stopwatch. The obvious drawback of the public self is that we might not live up to it, and we risk embarrassing ourselves when that happens. To protect the self in these circumstances, we engage in various self-protective behaviors. Self-handicapping is the tendency to engage in self-defeating behavior to protect the self in public and prevent others from making unwanted inferences based on poor performance. Think of how often people engage in self-destructive behaviors when their public selves are on the line. Students sometimes irrationally put too little effort into studying for an exam. A person may act too casually at a job interview or say shockingly inappropriate things on a first date. Why do we engage in such self-defeating behaviors? In Goffman's view, these actions provide an explanation for possible failure, thereby protecting the desired public self if failure does occur. Self-handicapping. The tendency to engage in self-defeating behavior in order to have an excuse ready should one perform poorly or fail. If you don't do as well as expected on an exam, there's no threat to your claim about your academic talents if you have the excuse of not having prepared for the exam in the first place. Of course, some self-handicapped claims are bogus. Classrooms are filled with students who act as though they haven't studied hard when, in fact, they did. The phenomenon is so common that students at Dartmouth College have given the people who do it a name, sneaky bookers. In one of the first experiments testing self-handicapping, male participants were led to believe that they were either going to succeed or going to have difficulty on a test they were scheduled to take. Participants were given the chance to ingest one of two drugs. The first would enhance their test performance, and the second would impair it. Participants who felt they were likely to fail the test preferred the performance-inhibiting drug, even though it was likely to diminish their chances of success. Apparently, people would sometimes rather fail and have a ready excuse for it than have success and no excuse for failure. Then go for success and have no excuse for failure. Box 3.5, focus on health, dying to present a favorable self. You might assume that self-presentation is always a good thing. Irving Goffman himself wrote about how people's strategic self-presentation and their honoring of other people's public claims are essential ingredients of harmonious communities. But self-presentational concerns can sometimes be dangerous to our health. Many practices that promote health are awkward or embarrassing and pose problems for our public identity. As a consequence, we avoid them. We sacrifice physical health to maintain a public identity defined by composure and aplomb. In one study, for example, 30 to 65% of respondents reported embarrassment when buying condoms. Embarrassment could deter sexually active teenagers from buying condoms, thus increasing the risk of sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies. Similarly, the fear of embarrassment at times prevents obese individuals from pursuing physical exercise programs or taking needed medications. In other instances, we engage in risky behavior to enhance our public image and identity. Concerns about others' impressions of us and concerns about our physical appearance are good predictors of excessive sunbathing, which increases the likelihood of skin cancer. Moreover, adolescents typically cite social approval as one of the most important reasons for starting to drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes. And the same need for an enhanced public image motivates many cosmetic surgeries, which carry with them a variety of health risks. Presenting the self online. As of late 2016, Facebook reported over 1.23 billion daily active users. When you add to the tally all the other possible forms of social media, that's a whole lot of social life happening online. What does self-presentation in the online social world look like? Given that most of the information on social networking sites, such as Facebook, is provided by the users themselves, there is ample opportunity for people to manage others' impression of them. Do people tend to present themselves authentically online, posting accurate information about who they are, what they've accomplished, their beliefs, their likes and dislikes, or do people take advantage of the opportunity that social networking sites offer to convey especially positive self-images? Self-presentation researchers have begun to tackle these questions. Brian Cox, ultra-naive positivist-ish, although science can't explain the existence of anti-positivists. Social media profiles and the self. Public presentation of the self often occurs online, such as in the social media profile pictured above. In one study, researchers had observers rate the personality traits, including extroversion, neuroticism, and openness, of 236 American and German users of online social networking sites, Facebook in the United States, and similar sites called StudiVZ and SchülerVZ in Germany, based on the information provided on their profile pages. Observers' ratings were compared with an accuracy criterion made up of an average of users' own ratings of their personality and the ratings of 4 well-acquainted friends. Users were also asked to provide ratings reflecting who they would ideally like to be. Would you expect observer ratings to correlate more highly with the user's own and friends' ratings, thus suggesting that people present themselves relatively accurately online? Or with users' ideal self ratings, suggesting instead that people try to present themselves in an ideal light online? You may be surprised to learn that the findings supported the former view, that online people tend to present their offline selves fairly accurately, a conclusion bolstered by other studies as well. Why would people present themselves accurately online when it seems so easy, not to mention tempting, to paint a positive image of the self online? Recall that although self-enhancement motives are robust, particularly among members of Western cultures, other self-evaluative motives may prevail at times. In particular, online self-presentations may be driven as much or more by self-verification motives, the desire to be known by others as they truly are. And crafting accurate online profiles of the self would serve that need. A less flattering explanation is that overly favorable online presentations of the self often need to withstand offline scrutiny. You can probably relate to having offline interactions with people who have read your profile, making it difficult or at least awkward to post blatantly inaccurate statements about yourself online. But perhaps surprisingly, research suggests that while we may present our personality and other attributes such as our occupation fairly accurately online, we are less likely to do so when it comes to our physical attributes such as height, weight, and age. This may be because of the vital role that physical appearance plays in attraction. See Chapter 10. Looking back, self-presentation involves people's efforts to get others to form particular impressions of them. These strategies are more characteristic of high self-monitors, people who change their behavior based on the situation in which they find themselves. Low self-monitors attend more to their own preferences and dispositions, with little regard for the situation or what others think. People may engage in self-defeating behaviors, or self-handicapping, to have an excuse available should they fail or perform poorly. Self-presentation is also relevant in online social networking, where it appears that people are more inclined to provide accurate information about some aspects of themselves, such as their personality traits, and less accurate information about other aspects of themselves, such as their physical features. Chapter Review Summary. The nature of the social self. The self is fundamentally social, and it shifts according to changes in the social situation. Self-schemas, organizing structures that help guide the construal of social information, represent a person's beliefs and feelings about the self, both in general and in specific situations. Origins of the sense of self. Socialization by family members and other important people is one of the foundations of the social self. Reflected self-appraisals are beliefs about what others think of one's social self. The social self is shaped by the current situation in many ways, and different selves are evoked in different situations. The social self is profoundly shaped by whether people live in independent or interdependent cultures. Women generally emphasize their relationships and define themselves in an interdependent way. Men generally emphasize their uniqueness and construe themselves in an independent way. People rely on social comparisons to learn about their own abilities, attitudes, and personal traits. Self-esteem. Trait self-esteem is a stable part of one's identity, whereas state self-esteem changes according to different contextual factors. Self-esteem is defined by particular domains of importance, or contingencies of self-worth, and by being accepted by others. Self-esteem is more important and is higher in Western cultures than in East Asian cultures. Motives driving self-evaluation. The motives for self-evaluation include the desire for self-enhancement and self-verification. The motivation to think well of oneself guides the maintenance of relationships that let people make favorable social comparisons and that provide the opportunity to bask in the successes of relationship partners. Having a stable set of self-beliefs gives people a sense of coherence and predictability. Self-regulation, motivating and controlling behavior. Self-discrepancy theory investigates how people compare their actual self to both their ideal self and their odd self and the emotional consequences of such comparisons. When people regulate their behavior with respect to ideal self standards, they have a promotion focus for attaining positive outcomes. When people regulate their behavior with respect to ought self standards, they have a prevention focus for avoiding negative outcomes. Self control can be facilitated by construals that focus on cooler features of a tempting stimulus and by higher level abstract construals of the situation. Self control strategies can be implemented automatically, such as when behavior unfolds automatically as specified in an implementation intention, or when long term goals automatically spring to mind when people face temptations that can thwart these goals. Self presentation. Self presentation is related to the public self. People present themselves the way they want others to see them. Face refers to the image people want others to have about them. Self monitoring ensures that a person's behavior fits the demands of the social context. People protect their public self through self handicapping, behavior that can excuse a poor performance or a failure. Self presentation happens online just as it does in face to face interactions. Different motives can guide online self presentation, including the desire for others to see the self accurately.